What's up, everybody? Oh, yeah, you
Give him 1 second.
That's
He's
the
still
intro.
chewing
I thought he was ready. Good. What's up, everybody? It's Anthony here. We are back with another Digging Deeper. I'm here with Pastor Bobby and Pastor Dawson. I don't know if are we calling him Pastor Dawson? Nope. Just Dawson. Pastor Bobby and Just Dawson. We're gonna get into another
title.
Digging Deeper. Yes, Just Dawson is his official title. Well, we're going to get into another Digging Deeper, and we've been in this series in Habit where we've been talking all about worship. If you were here Sunday, then you know Bobby gave another great message in the series, and one of the things that we talked about is being a living sacrifice. So I want to jump right in today, and I want to just ask...
Before you jump in,
Oh,
I want to ask you a question.
okay.
So on
Plot
Sunday, I saw at some point in time, we have, for those of you who don't come into the service, our 4th and 5th graders usually sit up front right. They take up a few rows during worship, and then they head out. But as soon as they left, I saw you and a bunch of, I think, youth students just slid up to the front.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if it was it students or leaders?
Students, all
students.
students.
All students.
Awesome.
And all I noticed was they were just like leaned in the whole time. So every time I said something, for those of you watching, you could see it. They were like leaning in, like I don't know, just like very curious. So talk to me about that. What made them come up front? What inspired that? What's that about? What's going on in youth?
Yeah. Well, that's great. Even better than the question I was going to ask. But so super cool. There was 5 seats on the front row, and I know it because there were 6 seats because there were 5 boys and me. And out of the 5 boys, I knew 4 of them, but then there was one new guy. And so I was sitting with 2 of the boys, and then the other guy showed up late, and we were sitting there it was 5. I'm realizing it now. So there were 4 boys. But I was sitting with 2 of the boys, and the other 2 boys showed up, and there weren't seats next to us, and we were probably 4 rows back. And so they showed up, and they're leaning back, like high-fiving us, telling us what's up, but they're a row in front of us, and there's a new kid there. And so all the kids' ministry, whatever, they leave, and I lean over to the guys next to me, and I'm like, in the middle of your video, in the Christmas offering video, I go, hey, you guys don't have to talk across each other. I was like, why don't we just move? And they were like, where are we going to move? And I was like, let's move up front. And immediately, these 2 boys, they're newer to church too, they both just were like, to the front? And I was like, yeah, it's not any different. If anything, it's going to help you pay attention more. And they were like, I'm big. I'm like 6'7". I can't stand up in front of everyone. And I was like, yeah, you can. He's like, it's going to be awkward. And I was like, no, it's not. All we're going to do is, as soon as the video ends, stand up, walk to the front. So we did that, and it was like, my mindset behind it was, this is going to be far more impactful if we're all together versus if we're separated, which... like, it's teenagers, so just being a row apart, it's easy to turn around or easy to lean forward and say something or mess with each other. And even just being side by side, I think would hopefully at the very least make the one new person in that group feel included and welcome. Yeah. So we did, and we moved to the front, and it was like, honestly, immediately, like you said, they leaned in. I felt that too. Like, they said, what's up? We all had a quick laugh about how nervous they were to move to the front, like they were just going to disintegrate or something because they stood up. And then we get to the front, and right away they were leaned in, they were engaged. And then the coolest part to me, though, was you probably didn't even notice this, but they seemed not just more engaged with you, but like more engaged with me, meaning like they would turn to me and ask me questions in the middle of your message, which was cool because there was a lot of times I'm like, oh, let's come back to that. Like, it's too big of an explanation. Or like one of the things that was a complete win that I think is going to make an immediate difference in the relationship with God is the 3 boys who have been coming regularly for like a month and a half. They all had their Bible open on their app, and it's all in the King James Version. So they're sitting there and they're nodding along like, this is such a good message. And I lean over and I see he's got it in King James Version, and I see they all do, and I lean forward and I was like, y'all understand that? And he goes, no, not at all. And I was like, so I showed him, I switched the translation for him over to NLT, which is what you teach out of and I teach out of too. And I was like, this should help. And like audibly, they're all, reading
awesome.
along. So yeah, it was super cool. And that was my heart with that. And then also, this has been a push within the youth ministry is, I think engagement is entirely up to us. And I think as communicators, we can be more engaging, but still it's up to you as an individual in the crowd to give as much attention to something as you want. And I think the closer you sit, just the easier it is to pay attention.
Yeah.
So it's kind of this culture piece that we're trying to build, even of, hey, I think like good attentive people, and honestly even leaders, there's a draw to be as close as possible, not as far back as possible.
Yeah, I like that. I sit up front. That's what I told someone earlier on Sunday actually.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Yeah, I sit up front. I like it better." I'm like, "Yeah, me too. That's why I sit up here."
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that was a big culture piece in my college too. Like my Christian colleges, they would always say leaders sit in the front, to the point where it'd be like almost we're arguing over who gets those seats. All right, fine. I guess I'll take the second row. All right, fine.
Dawson
I guess I'll
typically
take the third
sits
row.
in the second row. That's where he sits.
Yeah,
I do.
I always see him there. Dawson, you obviously, I think most people would know this. You lead worship in youth.
I do.
And we brought you on the podcast today because Anthony just had some things that he wanted to discuss with you and
Air it
maybe
out.
correct here on the podcast live in front of everybody.
Oh shoot, Anthony's gonna correct me? That's crazy.
I am.
I'm playing.
Anthony's gonna.
Anthony,
What does that mean? I'm just kidding.
Dawson, tell me more. Like, obviously, you're a worshiper. You lead worship in youth. I would just be curious. Like, what is your perspective? And this might be a deep question where you're like, I wish you'd have told me beforehand. But what's your perspective, like, on worship culture when it comes to the current teenagers you have the opportunity to lead in worship? What is it that you think they? What's some hurdles they have to get over, and what's some things that you do intentionally to help them lean into the presence of God in those moments of worship?
Yeah, so I think to go over the culture, we have to go back to like when I first started working here, and the students were like completely disengaged during worship, just because of the culture, how it was. It's like wasn't of like utmost importance. They were like, when are we gonna just hear Anthony speak, tell a funny story, and then go play outside and play a game like with everybody? Like that was like really the culture.
What happened was Anthony didn't have any funny stories, so it was like we got to fix it with something else.
Yeah, and I tried to sing, but I'm no Dawson, so it didn't go well.
But like it wasn't just like me coming in. It wasn't just like other people coming in and leading worship. It was like really a culture change amongst our students.
Yeah.
That it was very student led because of like the motivation that they saw their life change at camp. They saw their friends' lives change at camp. They're like, oh, we want that here. So that same energy was like brought back into the youth room, and that was so awesome to see, because I used to work at the camp that they would go up to, and seeing like some of the students, even if it's just 5% of them, have the same heart for worship in the youth room that they do at camp was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And we spoke to it. Like, to be honest, we didn't just say, oh, we're, all the leaders are meeting and we're going, hey, there's a major culture piece missing here within worship. Like those conversations happen, but then especially after camp, when there was like some momentum and kids were saying, I wish worship was like that, and I wish messages were like that, and I wish youth was like that. We didn't, again, just have a conversation behind closed doors. We immediately said, okay, so like here's why that's lacking and here's why that's missing. And like a big piece that Dawson and I both touched on was expectation. Yeah. Like camp doesn't change lives, right? It's God that changes lives. But the thing about camp that's different than, I think, services, and the thing about camp worship that's different than worship during service at the time was expectation. They show up to camp expecting God to move, expecting to have crazy worship, expecting to go to the front and jump around and sing, expecting to cry. I'm like, if you were to really sit down and ask yourselves as individuals, what are you expecting when you show up to a youth service here, not at camp? Are you expecting to encounter God? Are you expecting to worship? Or are you like,
I think, that same mentality shifts into a Sunday morning perspective.
100%.
When people show up to church, do you, if you're, maybe you come to Rice City, maybe you don't, but when you show up to your church on a Sunday morning, do you walk in the doors going, I have come here today to meet with God, to encounter the presence of God, for God to speak into my life, for my thinking to be changed, for if you walk in with that expectation, it doesn't make God more real, because God is real. It doesn't, but it makes you more aware of God's presence in the
that's
room.
huge.
which is what you kind of touched on a little bit on Sunday when you talked about our thinking. What you're thinking about, like that matters. What occupies your brain, it matters. And I think, worship in itself, what's crazy is we're doing this series on Sundays about worship, and it was totally not planned, but we've been in a worship series in youth as well. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the things you're talking about, we've been talking about in very similar ways. And I think 2 weeks ago or something, we talked about how our perspective actually kind of controls our worship at times. Because if you show up and you're focused about me, myself, what's going on in my life, what's wrong in my life, what's good in my life, what do I need, what do I want, then like you're worshiping you.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that like we challenged our students with is like worship. I'm a youth pastor, so it has to all be like alliterations and stuff. It's like it's all about your attitude, your action, and your awe. Your attitude is all about how you view yourself, what your thoughts are on yourself. Are you going into that moment thinking about you, or are you thinking about something else? Your action is a call to response. Are you being obedient to God, which you've talked about too? And then your awe is how you view God.
Yeah.
Who is God to you? What does God mean to you? Like, if he's worth your attention, then you'll give it to him.
Yeah. It's good.
Yeah.
So even like that, when you talk about the power of thinking, I think like going into a moment of worship, and you talk about sacrifice even. Well, sacrifice should be difficult, right? Like sacrifice is, if it's not difficult, it's not a sacrifice.
Literally.
And so like, I love
man,
that.
I'm sacrificing eating peas for the next month of my life.
I guess I won't do green beans again.
Oh man, what a
bummer.
sacrifice.
Thank you, God. Thank you, God. No, like sacrifice should be difficult. And one of the things I loved about your message on Sunday is you said like word for word, when Jesus called us, he said, give me everything. God doesn't say, I want some of you.
Yeah.
He says, I want all of you.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, that should affect our thinking, like being transformed by the renewal of our mind. That's talking about changing the way that you think.
Yeah.
Because that affects everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. One of the questions I was curious about that I was going to ask you earlier, though, is when it comes to sacrifice, what do you think some of the biggest sacrifices are that people face, or maybe you faced? And then maybe even what are some practical ways to, get around those, or get behind those, I should say. Not avoid making those sacrifices, but maybe practical ways to help continuously sacrifice.
So when you say, what is it, like, what's some of the biggest sacrifices when someone is like, that, offer your body as a living sacrifice?
Yes.
What do those look like? I think oftentimes it's not the big things we think about, but it's the small day-to-day things. So if you were to like simple little thought here, if you were to tell someone, hey, put down your phone and don't use it for 2 weeks, don't pick it up for 2 weeks, the average person would tell you that's impossible.
Yeah, I got anxious just hearing you say that.
Yeah. That I can't exist in that world.
Yeah.
So I'll give you for instance. So for me, I know, like, I have this will sound weird on the podcast, I have a bent towards addiction. So like there's a lot of addictive personality in my family.
Yeah.
So I know that I can quickly become engrossed by something.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, there are some things that, it's fine. It's like, I'm addicted to broccoli. I guess that's good. I don't know. No, there are some things where like, it can produce good things in your life.
Yeah.
But balance is important. And there are some things you just got to make sure you avoid. And like in my day-to-day life, I know there's times that I can get caught up doom scrolling. There's times I can get caught up, engrossed by my phone, engrossed by the video, engrossed by Netflix, engrossed by all these things going on. And then I use phrases like this: I just didn't have time. How many times have you used the excuse that I didn't have time to do something when you had time? You just had priorities out of line. And so I think some of the biggest, like in that moment of, offer your body as a living sacrifice, oftentimes it's what we do day to day. So it's like sacrificing things that we feel like we have a right to, that we don't necessarily
like
have.
what? Like what?
Like I have a right to, again, let's use money, for example. Everyone believes they have a right. It's your right to have Netflix. It's your right to have data on your cell phone. It's your right to have all the other streaming apps. It's your right to have everything that you pay out. And then you'll go, well, I don't know if I can give because I just don't have enough money. Well, your rights that you're using, you're prioritizing, and you're unwilling to sacrifice something there so you can do something like generosity. Now, I know we're not talking about generosity, though giving is a form of worship, so it does all connect.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's those things. It's the way we deal with our time, the way we deal with our relationships. When's the last time someone offended you and you chose to stay unoffended? You have a right to be offended.
Yeah.
Well, maybe the way I worship God is to choose to live unoffendable.
Yeah.
And though what they did was worthy of offense, as an act of worship to God, I am going to offer my body as a living sacrifice,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to live offended and bitter
Yep.
by that, because the consequence of that action is I'm living to my own thinking and to my own ways. Geez, all of Romans 12 is the way you treat people, the way you act towards people. I broke it down all at the end of the message, but this idea that there are things that I think, and sometimes I think wrong. There are things that I believe, and sometimes I believe wrong. But I offer my thoughts to God. I offer my thinking, my beliefs, my day-to-day, and realize sometimes I get it right, sometimes I get it wrong. But oftentimes, I don't think it's I got to sacrifice $1 million today. I got to sacrifice this huge thing. Usually it's our day-to-day decisions that we make
Disciplines, yep.
consistently. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think the day-to-day, like all that simple stuff of like, it's like working out, right? Like if you're not going to get results from something if you're not willing to put in effort that's like recognizably good. It's like if you're going to be like, oh, I'm going to walk into the gym, I'm going to see what other people do, I'm going to kind of give it a try, and like then I'll walk back out and I'll feel good about myself, and then I'll probably get a cheeseburger or something like that. It's like if you walked into church with that same mentality for worship, I'm going to walk in, I'm going to look at what everybody else is doing, I'm just going to copy them, and I'm going to go back to living how I was doing. It's like you weren't really worshiping. It wasn't sacrifice. It was just like,
It's great.
it was copy paste.
Yeah, you don't get stronger and bigger by watching other people work out.
Literally.
And it's the same thing with church.
You know, I don't think I'm going to preach about this in this series, but there's a point when David's going to give an offering and someone else offers to give him. He's like, I'm going to buy it. And then they say, no, I'll give it to you. It's yours. You can have it. So the guy's like, you can have it. And David's like, how dare I?
Mm-hmm.
How dare I give the Lord an offering, a sacrifice that costs me nothing?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's costly. It's
And so it's what you're saying. It's like sometimes we live in the overflow or the residual of other people's sacrifice.
Yeah.
But it needs to be personal.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to talk about those things. Like if you know it's going to cost you, like I mean, as pastors, right? As worship leaders, like that's something that, like I think needs to be said, because when it's expected, you understand this is going to cost me, and it costs you, comfort. It costs you control of your life. Like this relationship we have with Jesus, it's a costly one. And like we even talked about it today in staff meeting a little bit, just what leadership is and how some like through the lens of leadership, it's not always about what's best for me. It's about what's best for you, what's best for them.
Yeah.
And that alone is costly too.
Yeah.
So I guess even thinking through the lens of someone who's maybe listening to this podcast or was there Sunday, that's like, hey, I want to start living my life as a sacrifice, as a day. Like I want to start making daily sacrifices. Where would you recommend someone like that start?
I think you should do one. If you want to start this figured out, I would do a time, like track your time for a week and see how much time you spend doing what, where. So make a time budget, so to speak,
Time management,
like you would a money budget. Where's your money going? Where's your time going? Those two things alone will tell you what you're sacrificing to. I've heard it said that there was a lot of idol worship and false god worship in the Bible, but we don't have that anymore in today's terms. But the rebuttal to that is that actually, if you begin to look at it, we all worship. Like we have a worshiping society. And quickly, the two easiest ways to find out what you worship is to find out where you spend your time and where you spend your money.
Yep.
Those two things. So if you're like, okay, I want to start living a life of sacrifice towards God, look at those two things and ask yourself, if you were to gauge your life based off those two things, do they exemplify someone who is sacrificing, who's living sacrificially for God? Right. I think that's the starter. I would gauge your relationships. I think that's important as well. Are you only friends with people who can give you something? Or do you reach out to those who have nothing to offer you in return? Yeah. Dawson, do you have any thoughts? You look like you were adjusting the mic. I thought you had a thought.
No, I was just fixing it because I was trying to decide if I wanted to lean back or lean forward.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't pick one.
Got it. But yeah, so that's where I would start.
Yeah.
You got anything you would add to it? You're a smart guy.
Well, I don't know about smart, but I would say for me, like a big push is the word submission to me. Like I think when I think worship and I think how am I starting, I think that submission does require faith. Like I don't think that like I don't think in order for me to fully submit, I need to know everything. And I think that the people who have that idea about submission, like I need to know everything in order to submit, actually rob themselves of the opportunity of experiencing God in fullness at times because they go, well, I need to know X, Y, Z. Or I'm like, well, that's the whole point of faith, right? Is you're not gonna know.
Yeah.
But when I'm constantly submitting myself and surrendering myself and all the things we've talked about, again, sacrifice, it's all alliteration for me at this point. But but when I'm
Surrender,
submitting
sacrifice.
myself, yeah, it's coming from this understanding that I don't know everything. And like I've heard it said in church, we actually just talked about this at camp nights with our students, but like that submission, it's saying, I might not know the future, but I know who's in control of it. And that's the submission piece. It's the character and the person of God that you're putting your trust in, not a specific result or a specific, like you're expecting something in return. So I think that reminding yourself, one, God offers you grace, so you should offer yourself grace. Like we're this call to step into this relationship with God is not, we're not expecting everyone to immediately have it perfect and you cut out all your bad habits and you implement good habits and good disciplines. Like there's a process and you will mess up. We mess up, all of us. But offering yourself that grace is important because when you're submitting and you mess up, then instead of going, oh, I messed up, this probably just isn't for me, I'm probably not ready, and then separating yourself, you're going, okay, deep breath, I messed up, I made a mistake, let's maybe check my boundaries, let's check what I did and how I ended up in making this mistake, and implement some new things so I don't get back there. But reminding yourself that submission requires grace and trust that God has your best in mind doesn't mean that it's the easiest, but it's the best.
Yeah.
Then that those type of reminders I think help you go, okay, I'm going to continuously live for God because it is the best that's in mind, and that hopefully builds that routine in.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to like live uncomfortably, right? You have to actually sacrifice something. If you can't live as a sacrifice if you don't do anything that's uncomfortable for you. If everything that you just do is comfortable, it's like, what are you actually sacrificing? Yeah. It's like if you're saying just like, oh, it's just not in my giftings to like reach out to people and like spread the gospel or anything like that. It's like, well, that really doesn't matter, does it? It's a call for like the whole church. So that's something that you have to sacrifice. That has to be an act of worship. You're a living sacrifice when you live out the things that are hard for you to do.
Yeah. And that's why I brought up Luke 14 in the context of the message, because it was asking the question that I felt like would sit in most people's minds. It's this idea of like, well, you're saying God wants certain things. You're saying Jesus wants certain things out of me. Like, and then it's really a two-part. The only one I addressed on Sunday was this idea of like, well, do I really, is there something that I can give? Is there something I can withhold and still receive the benefits of following Christ? That's the question I was really answering.
Yeah.
But in the subtext of that, the back of my head was also thinking that there's a gospel that's been preached where it's just grace and then nothing ever happens. It's just like one word, now I'm good, now whatever, go back to living the way I used to, it doesn't matter. Like it's this idea of that. And I wanted to address also the fact that Jesus in Luke 14 it's the most clear thing he could have said. And I jokingly said if a consultant was consulting Jesus, he would have said, do not say this to people because you're not going to attract more followers. You're going to detract more followers. But what he is attracting in that, in my opinion, is people who are going, hey, I'm fully following Jesus. Yeah. And so that's what he's asking for. He's like, hey, listen, you got to give everything. You got to die to yourself daily. You got to count the cost. It's going to cost you something. And here it is. And it's that idea of worship. Sometimes it won't feel like it's going to be better for us.
Yeah.
Sometimes it won't be comfortable. And it could be as simple as sometimes it's not comfortable to raise my hands in worship because whatever, I feel like whatever. But sometimes it's not comfortable to give that money to someone as an act of worship. Sometimes it's not comfortable to ignore an offense and to be a peacemaker when someone else is being
I hear that, yep.
something like to be what Christ has called us to be is sometimes not comfortable. I was talking to one of the guys in our church after Sunday, and I think the way he told me was, I think it was a fight. He got in a fight with somebody at school, and his dad made him memorize Romans 12 before he had to memorize the whole chapter, which I thought was brilliant
That's awesome.
discipline.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
that's
And
crazy.
obviously it worked out well because he's still serving Jesus, loving Jesus in our church today. But when he was a kid, that was his father's approach to a situation like that. How we treat others, how we respond to others. Sometimes can be uncomfortable the way Jesus has called us to. It'll feel like a sacrifice, but ultimately it pays out in the end. It's the best option for us.
Yeah. Well, even like the perspective about like the perspective shift that happens when you realize how powerful your thinking is. Like for me, I see a difference in my worship even to this day when I approach worship as am I worshiping God for what he's done or am I worshiping God for who he is? Mm-hmm. Like that alone is a transformational thought because if I'm worshiping God for what he's done, then it's easy for my emotion to creep in. You know, and when I feel like something like I'm on the back end of God doing something big in my life, then I might be worshiping with all my, everything I have and all this. But maybe if I'm in a season where it feels like the last thing that God did for me maybe was a little like a couple months ago or something that I feel like was major, then I can feel that emotion creep in, and instead of being filled with gratitude and appreciation, I can feel a little bitterness creep in at times.
Yeah, because what you're essentially worshiping is you're worshiping the thing God did for you.
Yeah.
Not necessarily God and who he is.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's easy to make that mistake.
Yep.
Because I get excited when awesome things happen.
Yeah, 100%.
You know what I mean? Don't
I
we
wanna
all
see God
like
move.
yeah,
we all do.
And
Totally.
so but that can't be our basis for why we worship. And I think our basis for why we worship has to boil down to exactly what you said. It's who God is. He is worthy of our worship.
Because of who he is. If
Yeah.
he never did anything else for us, he'd
Yeah.
be worth it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like you being a worship leader. I mean, like I said, Bobby and I can sing. It's probably not good. I don't know about you, but for me, I've done the national anthem at youth once. I just randomly opened with it, and it was they asked me to do it every week. I'm like, not going to happen. I almost passed out.
That's amazing. I was on an album once. I was singing on an album.
you
This
win.
is
You
real
win.
life. Now, I can't sing to
crazy.
save my life, but they needed a choir sounding. And so, and then they layered it. And yeah, man,
go.
I was on an album. Don't tell your
All right.
friends.
Well, you win.
Wow.
That's
I
the
s-
album name is Don't Tell Your Friends. Was it pop punk or what?
Oh, no, it was something else.
But as someone who can sing and does lead worship, how do you like walk us through your mindset? How do you lead people into a spot of surrender?
That's a really good question. I feel like it's a lot about reading the room. So I'm going to specifically go with students because one, it's what
do
I
it.
do, and two, it's the people I love worshiping with the most. To be honest, it's like the position that they're in. I can always think about where have I been and what would I need to hear, and like that's something that I pray about constantly. It's like, God, where was I? Where are these students? And where did they need to go? Like where I needed to go. And so a lot of it's just like, all right, a lot of students in the room, they're completely disengaged. Like they really don't want to be here. So now it's probably a moment to talk about, all right, we're going to sing Give Me Jesus. What does it mean for us to say that right now in this moment? What does always applying the moment, the feelings that they're having to the song, to the lyrics that we're singing. They're not just words that we're going to say and put our hands up and just like have a good time. Like this is actually like an act of sacrifice. Okay, you don't want to be here? Good. Let's lean into that. Let's say, God, even though I don't want to be here, I just want you and I know you're going to do something. So it's addressing things like that. It's like looking at a specific kid and seeing like that he's having a hard time and then like addressing that specific moment, even if it's for that one kid, just say like, hey, I know some of you may have been having like a really hard day, but like God is still here and God is still for you. So like one, if you need anything, we got leaders and like we have leaders here that want to talk to you. But two, there's a God who wants to speak to you right now. Like just sit here and listen to the message. It's always about addressing specific moments because it's not just like a group of people singing songs to God. It's also individual people with individual lives going through individual hardships, worshiping God together.
I like what you're saying there because your goal seems to be you're just trying to get people to move like a couple steps.
Yeah.
And no matter where they're at in that room, it sounds like if they're in that place of worshiping Jesus, you're going to try to just move them a couple steps closer, even further. And if they're in the, I don't want to worship Jesus at all, just get them a couple steps down the way because it's just leading them in that. And it's wise because if someone's in the room and they're not worshiping at all, and you're only talking to someone who is fully on the other side, they're going to think, there's going to be no way, the chasm is too wide, they won't be able to get there, but to draw them further, and I'm sure you feel this as well, Dawson, it's not it doesn't happen on one night, on one service.
Right.
It's a continuation of that.
Yeah.
Where a year down the road, you probably have watched a kid go from not wanting to worship Jesus at all to now has
100%.
moved.
Yeah. Big time.
And that's the same on Sundays, which is why, let's just talk about this for a minute.
Yeah.
It's why it's so important to have a spiritual discipline of being a part of the church gathering.
Yeah.
That's why the Bible says,
That's huge.
don't neglect the gathering, because we're on a journey of following Jesus, and it's a continual, daily, weekly kind of thing. And so if you are part of church, make it a habit of yours to be consistent in attending and involvement. The stat is, and all stats are made up, so who knows if this is true. But they say that the average church person goes to church one every 4 to 6 weeks now.
Yeah. In California, they say that's one every 7 weeks, the last time I saw.
So like I said, all the stats are made up.
Yeah.
The point is there's no stat that says that the average Christian goes to church once every week or once every 2 weeks. It's all 4, 6, or 7.
Yeah.
What if we adjusted those stats, and what would it look like in someone's personal life to adjust those stats?
Yeah.
Personally, it might feel like a sacrifice, because you might have to sacrifice sleep, your only day off, your whatever. Make the list up of excuses
your friend's party,
on why you've missed church before, whatever. And I'm not saying don't take vacations and stuff like that. That's not the theology I believe in. I believe you could take trips and vacations, and that's part of your life experience as well. But having a consistent pattern of church going, church attending, church worshiping, church involvement, church volunteering helps us become more equipped, more aware followers of Jesus, more intentional worshipers, all the above.
Yeah, and I think at the very least, if we're being honest, there's not a bigger Christian community than the church in all of our lives.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Like people like to think, well, I got great friends and I got great all this, and it's true. But where else are you going to be surrounded by however many 540 seats filled with people all there for the same thing?
Yeah.
And like coming back to what I talked about earlier, like being in awe of God. The question I ask the students, question I ask myself, question I'll ask you guys. But like, when was the last time you were amazed with God? When was the last time like God did something that amazed you? And the truth is, for most of us, when we're isolated and we're separated from the rest of the body and we're not showing up to church, that's going to be a lot bigger of a gap than when you're surrounded by people who have stories, people who have, their own communities. Or I think of baptisms, for example. Like we show the videos. We don't just do that to give like insight to other people's life, but how many times do we show those videos and you have someone in the room go, oh, I didn't know someone else dealt with that. Oh, I didn't know someone else has been through a situation like that. And like seeing God move it's an amazing thing. But when it's just you alone, you're less likely to encounter that.
Yeah. You're less likely to notice it, and you're not going to encounter it in the fullness of the body.
Yeah.
And it's the whole analogy. Romans 12, coincidentally, talks about the body of Christ, where many parts, one body.
Yep.
And so you isolate yourself from the body. You might be a really awesome thumb, but if you're not connected to the body,
what good is it?
What good is a really awesome thumb? And thumbs are great. Thumbs are like, that's an important part of the thumbs gives a lot of options here. But if you're disconnected, you're not going to experience even the fullness of what you were created to be yourself, let alone the fullness of the body. And so, that disconnection piece will cause you to become disillusioned in your faith. It'll cause you to a multitude of things. I don't think we're talking about church attendance though, but
no, but you're right. It's crazy because like the more time I've spent in my relationship with God too, the more you see like how countercultural Christianity is from the rest of the world, which I know we're like, duh, but at the same time, it's like, it's a different thing when you say that versus you experience it. Like the world will tell you, worry about yourself, focus on, you yourself, making money, getting your life right, getting everything you want. Whereas like we see in this relationship with God, the more selfless we are, actually the more beneficial it is to us.
Yeah.
And like selfishly, I might not want to show up to church. I might not want to be in a small group. I might not want to serve. I might not want to give. I might not want to raise my hands in worship. I might not want to sing along. But again, like that's why it's a sacrifice.
Yeah.
It should be uncomfortable, and it's not about what we want.
Yeah. You just remind me of a song. from back in the day when I first started going to church. They used to sing it. It's like
I don't think
I think it goes, "I'll bring a sacrifice of praise to
know
the
this?
house of the Lord."
I don't
know that one.
No, I don't.
No, but I want it to be my new ringtone.
My
You know
oldest
what,
worship
man?
song is Ocean, so 2016 is as far back as I go.
Well,
I know. I'll stand.
There it is.
Arms and-
2012. Yeah,
Yeah,
this song
there
was
you go.
probably like 1991, and
Oh, yeah, no, I
I'm sure
don't.
there's still some churches that sing that song today. But yeah, there it is.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
What else we got? Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about real quick. We had an event Friday night with our youth ministry. I just want to hit this quick called Camp Night. So if you're not involved
yeah.
in youth ministry, you don't know about it, I just want to share a quick story because I think
Love it. Let's hear it.
it's important to me that the church knows God's doing big things. But we did an event, middle school, high school combined, had 120 plus students there. A lot of kids that are regular attendees were out as well because high school football games, which boo, right? But it was incredible. And one of my favorite moments, one of my favorite things was we went out of our way to say, like, let's get students involved. So we had, I think, more than half the worship team was students that are still in high school. And then quick shout out to a kid named Gage. One of our students named Gage is a junior. He did a devotional moment. So he came on stage after our first two songs of worship, and Dawson really dialed up the whole theme. So like the whole room just went blacked out, and it was just a light. And he read a verse, and he did a little devo on what it means to have the light of God within you, and how when we're constantly trying to put it under a lampshade, not only are we not being effective to the kingdom, but we're actually not feeding our own selves. And so it was just an incredible, incredible moment. And so I just wanted to let everyone know, like, God's moving and He's doing big things, not just in the main auditorium and the main services on Sunday, but throughout the youth ministry, throughout the kids ministry.
Yeah.
I just think it's important that.
And you'll be doing
we
another
share
camp
those.
night soon, maybe? Again? Are you going to do another
the date
one?
is TBD. Yeah, the idea for this is that we will do 2 a year, and this will be the biggest event that we put on.
Yeah.
And it'll split the year into thirds. So just calendar-wise for us, camp has always been the best thing we do. But that's run by another group of people, obviously Forest Home, who do it really well. But also we went, well, how can we build opportunity and initiative and culture within our own church, within high school and middle school? That way it doesn't feel like two separate ministries, but one church, one body. And so, it'll split the year into thirds essentially. So probably one around March every year will be the goal, camp in July, and then another one around October, November, and then it'll split the year in thirds. And
That's
so,
awesome.
Oh, yeah. And if you want to be involved in that, we have a lot of one-time serve opportunities, and I would love for you to be a part. So
There it
if
is.
you see
Good
this,
plug.
let me know, and I'll get you there.
Shameless plug from Anthony, the
Not
youth
shameless.
pastor.
Hey, you're too.
Real good
You think
plug.
you're too big to serve? You're too little to lead.
One quick thing to tie all that together. It was crazy to see, like, with Gage, like, with a little bit of nerves going up before.
Lot
and
of
just
nerves.
Going through with it. Like, that was an act of sacrifice and worship for him.
Yeah.
Seeing the students be on stage and, like, being able to, like, worship and have other students see them and, like, such a big, like, different setting. Because the students don't typically use the in-ears. The students don't typically have, like, a live drummer and all these different things that are on the worship team.
Yeah, that's true.
But that was an act of sacrifice for them. Everybody had to get a little bit out of their comfort zone. And, like, you could see, like, how that, like, had the capacity for God to move so much more in other students because they see, oh, my peers are doing this. Oh, my peers are, like, up there speaking, like, oh, I bet I could do that. Oh, my peers are talking about this. My peers are singing this song. Like, I should sing along. Oh, I should raise my hands. Oh, my friends are next to me and they're raising my hands. Oh, my friend who invited me to this event is, like, introducing me to all these people, and I feel like I actually have friends now. It's like all these students going out of their way to go out of their comfort zone and sacrificing their time. Sacrificing a lot of time, to be honest. Sacrificing time, sacrificing effort, sacrificing comfortability. Like, it was such, like, a great way to see them worship, but that, like, vertical impact that they had allowed that to horizontally impact all the students as well.
Oh, it was so cool.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Well, that's it for another Digging Deeper. So we're looking forward to catching up again next week. You guys have a good one.
See ya.
That was a terrible ending.
I'm leaving that.
That
in.
was so anti.
I'm leaving all of this.
Didn't
in.
feel it felt genuine inside me, but didn't come out that way. Hey, thanks for watching. We love you guys so much. See you next week.
Now it feels like
Now
you're
it's
just
definitely
making
fake.
stuff up now.
I don't know you, but thank you for being here.
See you guys next week.